entertain. 82. Eparith of Chada. It happened one good weather day in spring, 8999, that Harik was at home in his house with only few people, and time hung heavy on his hands. Sigurd asked him if he would row a little for amusement. Harik was willing. And they went to the shore, and drew down a 6-oared skiff. And Sigurd took the mast and rigging belonging to the boat out of the boathouse, for they often used to sail when they went for amusement on the water. Harik went out into the boat to hang the rudder. The brothers Sigurd and Hawk, who were very strong men, were fully armed, as they were used to go about at home among the peasants. Before they went out to the boat they threw into her some butter kits and a bread chest, and carried between them a great keg of ale. When they had rowed a short way from the island the brothers hoisted the sail, while Harik was seated at the helm. And they sailed away from the island. Then the two brothers went up to where Harik the Bond was sitting. And Sigurd says to him, "Now thou must choose one of these conditions. First, that we brothers direct this voyage. Or, if not, that we bind thee fast and take the command. Or, third, that we kill thee." Harik saw how matters stood with him. As a single man, he was not better than one of those brothers, even if he had been as well armed. So it appeared to him wisest to let them determine the course to steer, and bound himself by oath to abide by this condition. On the Sigurd took the helm, and steered south along the land, the brothers taking particular care that they did not encounter people. The wind was very favorable, and they held on sailing along until they came south to Trondheim and to Nidaros, where they found the king. Then the king called Harik to him, and in a conference desired him to be baptized. Harik made objections. And although the king and Harik talked over it many times, sometimes in the presence of other people, and sometimes alone, they could not agree upon it. At last the king says to Harik, "Now thou mayst return home, and I will do thee no injury. Partly because we are related together, and partly that thou mayst not have it to say that I caught thee by a trick, but know for certain that I intend to come north next summer to visit you Halifalanders, and ye shall then see if I am not able to punish those who reject Christianity." Harik was well pleased to get away as fast as he could. King Olaf gave Harik a good boat of 10 or 12 pair of oars, and let it be fitted out with the best of everything needful. And besides he gave Harik 30 men, all lads of mettle, and well appointed. 83. Eving Kinrifle's death. Harik of Chada went away from the town as fast as he could. But Hawk and Sigurd remained in the king's house, and both took baptism. Harik pursued his voyage until he came to Chada. He sent immediately a message to his friend Eving Kinrifa, with the word that he had been with King Olaf, but would not let himself be cowed down to accept Christianity. The message at the same time informed him that King Olaf intended coming to the north in summer against them, and they must be at their posts to defend themselves. It also begged Eving to come and visit him, the sooner the better. When this message was delivered to Eving, he saw how very necessary it was to devise some counsel to avoid falling into the king's hands. He set out, therefore, in a light vessel with a few hands as fast as he could. When he came to Chada he was received by Harik in the most friendly way, and they immediately entered into conversation with each other behind the house. When they had spoken together but a short time, King Olaf's men, who had secretly followed Harik to the north, came up, and took Eving prisoner, and carried him away to their ship. They did not halt on their voyage until they came to Trondheim, and presented themselves to King Olaf at Nidaros. Then Eving was brought up to a conference with the king, who asked him to allow himself to be baptized, like other people. But Eving decidedly answered he would not. The king still, with persuasive words, urged him to accept Christianity, and both he and the bishop used many suitable arguments. But Eving would not allow himself to be moved. The king offered him gifts and great feasts, but Eving refused all. Then the king threatened him with tortures and death, but Eving was steadfast. Then the king ordered a pan of glowing coals to be placed upon Eving's belly, which burst asunder. Eving cried, "Take away the pan, and I will say something before I die," which also was done. The king said, "Wilt thou now, Eving, believe in Christ?" "No," said Eving, "I can take no baptism. For I am an evil spirit put into a man's body by the sorcery of Finns, because in no other way could my father and mother have a child." With that died Evine, who had been one of the greatest sorcerers. 84. Helgalin made Christian. The spring after, 8999, King Olaf fitted out and manned his ships, and commanded himself his ship the Crane. He had many and smart people with him. And when he was ready, he sailed northward with his fleet past Brida, and to Helgoland. Wheresoever he came to the land, or to the islands, he held a thing, and told the people to accept the right thing, and to be baptized. No man dared to say anything against it, and the whole country he passed through was made Christian. King Olaf was a guest in the house of Harik of Jada, who was baptized with all his people. At parting the king gave Harik good presents, and he entered into the king's service, and got peace, and the privileges of Lensman from the king. 85. Thor Hjort's death. There was a bond, binding Rod the Strong, who dwelt in Godi in Salten Fjord. Rod was a very rich man, who had many house servants, and likewise was a powerful man, who had many things in his service if he wanted them. Rod was a great idolater, and very skillful in witchcraft, and was a great friend of Thor Hjort, before spoken of. Both were great chiefs. Now when they heard that King Olaf was coming with a great force from the south to Helgoland, they gathered together an army, ordered out ships, and they too had a great force on foot. Rod had a large ship with a gilded head formed like a dragon, which ship had 30 rowing benches, and even for that kind of ship was very large. Thor Hjort had also a large ship. These men sailed southwards with their ships against King Olaf, and as soon as they met gave battle. A great battle there was, and a great fall of men, but principally on the side of the Helgolanders, whose ships were cleared of men, so that a great terror came upon them. Rod rode with his dragon out to sea, and set sail. Rod had always a fair wind wheresoever he wished to sail, which came from his arts of witchcraft. And, to make a short story, he came home to Godi. Thor Hjort fled from the ships unto the land, but King Olaf landed people, followed those who fled, and killed them. Usually the king was the foremost in such skirmishes, and was so now. When the king saw where Thor Hjort, who was quicker on foot than any man, was running to, he ran after him with his dog Vaj. The king said, Vaj, Vaj, catch the deer. Vaj ran straight in upon him, on which Thor halted, and the king threw a spear at him. Thor struck with his sword at the dog, and gave him a great wound. But at the same moment the king's spear flew under Thor's arm, and went through and through him, and came out at his other side. There Thor lived his life. But Vaj was carried to the ships. 86. King Olaf's voyage to Godi. King Olaf gave life and freedom to all the men who asked it and agreed to become Christian. King Olaf sailed with his fleet northwards along the coast, and baptized all the people among whom he came. And when he came north to Salten Fjord, he intended to sail into it to look for Rod, but a dreadful tempest and storm was raging in the fjord. They lay there a whole week, in which the same weather was raging within the fjord, while without there was a fine brisk wind only, fair for proceeding north along the land. Then the king continued his voyage north to Und, where all the people submitted to Christianity. Then the king turned about and sailed to the south again. But when he came to the north side of Salten Fjord, the same tempest was blowing, and the sea ran high out from the fjord, and the same kind of storm prevailed for several days while the king was lying there. Then the king applied to Bishop Sigurd, and asked him if he knew any counsel about it. And the bishop said he would try if God would give him power to conquer these arts of the devil. 87. Of Rod being tortured. Bishop Sigurd took all his mast ropes and went forward to the bow of the king's ship, ordered tapers to be lighted, and incense to be brought out. Then he set the crucifix upon the stem of the vessel, read the evangelist and many prayers, besprinkled the whole ship with holy water, and then ordered the ship tent to be stowed away, and to row into the fjord. The king ordered all the other ships to follow him. Now when all was ready on board the crane to row, she went into the fjord without the rowers finding any wind. And the sea was curled about their keel track like as in a calm, so quiet and still was the water. Yet on each side of them the waves were lashing up so high that they hit the side of the mountains. And so the one ship followed the other in the smooth sea track. And they proceeded this way the whole day and night, until they reached Godi. Now when they came to Rod's house's great ship, the dragon, was afloat close to the land. King Olaf went up to the house immediately with his people, made an attack on the loft in which Rod was sleeping, and broke it open. The men rushed in. Rod was taken and bound, and of the people with him some were killed and some made prisoners. Then the king's men went to a lodging in which Rod's house servants slept, and killed some, bound others, and beat others. Then the king ordered Rod to be brought before him, and offered him baptism. And, says the king, I will not take thy property from thee, but rather be thy friend, if thou wilt make thyself worthy to be so. Rod exclaimed with all his might against the proposal, saying he would never believe in Christ, and making a scoff of God. Then the king was wroth, and said Rod should die the worst of death. And the king ordered him to be bound to a beam of wood, with his face uppermost, and a round pin of wood set between his teeth to force his mouth open. Then the king ordered an adder to be stuck into the mouth of him. But the serpent would not go into his mouth, but shrunk back when Rod breathed against it. Now the king ordered a hollow branch of an angelica root to be stuck into Rod's mouth. Others say the king put his horn into his mouth, and forced the serpent to go in by holding a red-hot iron before the opening. So the serpent crept into the mouth of Rod and down his throat, and gnawed its way out of his side. And thus Rod perished. King Olaf took here much gold and silver, and other property and weapons, and many sorts of precious effects. And all the men who were with Rod he either had baptized, or if they refused had them killed or tortured. Then the king took the dragon ship which Rod had owned, and steered it himself. For it was a much larger and handsomer vessel than the crane. In front it had a dragon's head, and after crook, which turned up, and ended with the figure of the dragon's tail. The carved work on each side of the stem and stern was gilded. The ship the king called the Serpent. When the sails were hoisted they represented, as it were, the dragon's wings. And the ship was the handsomest in all Norway. The islands on which Rod dwelt were called Gilling and Haring. But the whole islands together were called Godi Isles, and the current between the isles and the mainland the Godi Stream. King Olaf baptized the whole people of the fjord, and then sailed southwards along the land. And on this voyage happened much and various things, which are set down in tales and sagas, namely, how witches and evil spirits tormented his men, and sometimes himself. But we will rather write about what occurred when King Olaf made Norway Christian, or in the other countries in which he advanced Christianity. The same autumn Olaf with his fleet returned to Trondheim, and landed at Nidaros, where he took up his winter abode. What I am now going to write about concerns the Icelanders. 88. Of the Icelanders, Charlton Olafsson, a son of Hoskuld, and a daughter's son of Egil Skallagrimsson, came the same autumn, AD 999, from Iceland to Nidaros, and he was considered to be the most agreeable and hopeful man of any born in Iceland. There was also Helder, a son of Gudmund of Modruveller, and Kolbein, a son of Thord, Freysgod, and a brother's son of Bren of Flows, together with Sverding, a son of Agodruno. All these were heathens. And besides them there were many more, some men of power, others common men of no property. There came also from Iceland considerable people, who, by Thangbrand's help, had been made Christians. Namely, Gisher the White, a son of T. Kettledrimson. And his mother was Olaf, daughter of Ersbodr, who was the son of the king of Geir. Bodr's brother was Sigurd, father of Eirik Jodiscal, whose daughter Astrid was King Olaf's mother. Jolf Skegisson was the name of another Iceland man, who was married to Vilborg, Gisher the White's daughter. Jolf was also a Christian. And King Olaf was very friendly to his relations Gisher and Jolf, who lived with him. But the Iceland men who directed the ships, and were heathens, tried to sail away as soon as the king came to the town of Nidaros, for they were told the king forced all men to become Christians. But the wind came stiff against them, and drove them back to Nidaros. They who directed the ships were Thorin of Jalsson, the Skald Hafred Otarsson, Bran the Generous, and Thorleik, Bran's son. It was told the king that there were Icelanders with ships there, and all were heathen, and wanted to fly from a meeting with the king. Then the king sent them a message forbidding them to sail, and ordering them to bring their ships up to the town, which they did, but without discharging the cargoes. They carried on their dealings and held a market at the king's beer. In spring they tried 3 times to slip away, but never succeeded. So they continued lying out the king's beer. It happened one fine day that many set out to swim for amusement, and among them was a man who distinguished himself above the others in all bodily exercises. Chariton challenged Halfred van der Deskel to try himself in swimming against this man, but he declined it. "Then will I make a trial," said Chariton, casting off his clothes and springing into the water. Then he set after the man, seizes hold of his foot, and dives with him underwater. They come up again, and without speaking a word dive again, and are much longer underwater than the first time. They come up again, and without saying a word dive a 3rd time, until Chariton thought it was time to come up again, which, however, he could in no way accomplish, which showed sufficiently the difference in their strength. They were underwater so long that Chariton was almost drowned. They then came up, and swam to land. This Northman asked what the Icelander's name was. Chariton tells his name. He says, "Thou art a good swimmer. But art thou expert also in other exercises?" Chariton replied that such expertness was of no great value. The Northman asks, "Why dost thou not inquire of me such things as I have asked thee about?" Chariton replies, "It is all one to me who thou art, or what thy name is." "Then will I," says he, "tell thee, I am Olaf Tryggvason." He asked Chariton much about Iceland, which he answered generally, and wanted to withdraw as hastily as he could. But the king said, "Here is a cloak which I will give thee, Chariton." And Chariton took the cloak with many thanks. 1. Endnotes 1. The part included in parenthesis is not found in the original text of Hans Kringla, but taken from Codex Frissinus. 89. Baptism of the Icelanders. When Michaelmas came, the king had high mass sung with great splendor. The Icelanders went there, listening to the fine singing and the sound of the bells. And when they came back to their ships, every man told his opinion of the Christian man's worship. Chariton expressed his pleasure at it, but most of the others scoffed at it. And it went according to the proverb, "The king had many ears," for this was told to the king. He sent immediately that very day a message to Chariton to come to him. Chariton went with some men, and the king received him kindly. Chariton was a very stout and handsome man, and of ready and agreeable speech. After the king and Chariton had conversed a little, the king asked him to adopt Christianity. Chariton replies that he would not say no to that, if he thereby obtained the king's friendship. And as the king promised him the fullest friendship, they were soon agreed. The next day Chariton was baptized, together with his relation Ball Thorlaxon, and all their fellow travelers. Chariton and Ball were the king's guests as long as they were in their white baptismal clothes, and the king had much kindness for them. Wherever they came they were looked upon as people of distinction. 90. Halfred van der Deskel baptized. As King Olaf one day was walking in the street, some men met him, and he who went the foremost saluted the king. The king asked the man his name, and he called himself Halfred. "Art thou the skald?" said the king. "I can compose poetry," replied he. "Wilt thou then adopt Christianity, and come into my service?" asked the king. "If I am baptized," replies he, "it must be on one condition, that thou thyself art my godfather. For no other will I have." The king replies, "That I will do." And Halfred was baptized, the king holding him during the baptism. Afterwards the king said, "Wilt thou enter into my service?" Halfred replied, "I was formerly in Earl Hakon's court. But now I will neither enter into thine nor into any other service, unless thou promise me it shall never be my lot to be driven away from thee." "It has been reported to me," said the king, "that thou art neither so prudent nor so obedient as to fulfill my commands." "In that case," replied Halfred, "put me to death." "Thou art a skald who composes difficulties," says the king. "But into my service, Halfred, thou shalt be received." Halfred says, "If I am to be named the composer of difficulties, what cost thou give me, king, on my name day?" The king gave him a sword without a scabbard, and said, "Now compose me a song upon this sword, and let the word sword be in every line of this trophy." Halfred sang thus: This sword of swords is my reward. For him who knows to wield a sword, and with his sword to serve his lord, yet wants a sword, his lot is hard. I would I had my good lord's leave, for this good sword is sheath that choose, I'm worth 3 swords one man use, but for the sword sheath now I crave. Then the king gave him the scabbard, observing that the word sword was wanting in one line of his trophy. That there instead are 3 swords in one of the lines, says Hafred. That is true, replies the king. Out of Hafred's lays we have taken the most of the true and faithful accounts that are here related about Olaf Tryggvason. 91. Thangbrand returns from Iceland. The same harvest, 8999, Thangbrand the priest came back from Iceland to King Olaf, and told the ill success of his journey. Namely, that the Icelanders had made lampoons about him, and that some even thought to kill him, and there was little hope of that country ever being made Christian. King Olaf was so enraged at this, that he ordered all the Icelanders to be assembled by sound of horn, and was going to kill all who were in the town. But Jarten, Gishur, and Jalt, with the other Icelanders who had become Christians, went to him, and said, King, thou must not fail from thy word, that however much any man may irritate thee, thou wilt forgive him if he turn from heathenism and become Christian. All the Icelanders here are willing to be baptized, and through them we may find means to bring Christianity into Iceland, for there are many amongst them, sons of considerable people in Iceland, whose friends can advance the cause. But the priest Thangbrand proceeded there seated here in court, with violence and manslaughter, and such conduct the people there would not submit to. The king hearkened to those remonstrances, and all the Iceland men who were there were baptized. 92. Of King Olaf's feats. King Olaf was more expert in all exercises than any man in Norway whose memory is preserved to us in sagas. And he was stronger and more agile than most men, and many stories are written down about it. One is that he ascended the Smalsar and fixed his shield upon the very peak. Another is that one of his followers had climbed up the peak after him, until he came to where he could neither get up nor down. But the king came to his help, climbed up to him, took him under his arm, and bore him to the flat ground. King Olaf could run across the oars outside the vessel while his men were rowing the Serpent. He could play with 3 daggers, so that one was always in the air, and he took the one falling by the handle. He could walk all round upon the ship's rails, could strike and cut equally well with both hands, and could cast 2 spears at once. King Olaf was a very merry, frolicsome man, gay and social, was very violent in all respects, was very generous, was very finical in his dress, but in battle he exceeded all in bravery. He was distinguished for cruelty when he was enraged, and tortured many of his enemies. Some he burnt in fire, some he had torn in pieces by mad dogs, some he had mutilated or cast down from high precipices. On this account his friends were attached to him warmly, and his enemies feared him greatly. And thus he made such a fortunate advance in his undertakings, for some obeyed his will out of the friendliest zeal, and others out of dread. 93. Baptism of Leif Erikson. Leif, a son of Eirik the Red, who first settled in Greenland, came this summer, 8999, from Greenland to Norway. And as he met King Olaf he adopted Christianity, and passed the winter, 81,000, with the king. 94. Fall of King Gudrod. Gudrod, a son of Eirik Bloodix and Gunhild, had been ravaging in the West Countries ever since he fled from Norway before the Earl Hakon. But the summer before mentioned, 8999, where King Olaf Tryggvason had ruled 4 years over Norway, Gudrod came to the country, and had many ships at war with him. He had sailed from England, and when he thought himself near to the Norway coast, he steered south along the land, to the quarter where it was least likely King Olaf would be. Gudrod sailed in this way south to Viken, and as soon as he came to the land he began to plunder, to subject the people to him, and to demand that they should accept of him as king. Now if the country people saw that a great army was come upon them, they desired peace and terms. They offered King Gudrod to send a thing message over all the country, and to accept of him at the thing as king, rather than suffer from his army. But they desired to delay until a fixed day, while the token of the thing's assembling was going round through the land. The king demanded maintenance during the time this delay lasted. The bonds preferred entertaining the king as a guest, by turns, as long as he required it. And the king accepted the proposal to go about with some of his men as a guest from place to place in the land, while others of his men remained to guard the ships. When King Olaf's relations, Herning and Thorgeir, heard of this, they gathered men, fitted out ships, and went northwards to Viken. They came in the night with their men to a place at which King Gudrun was living as a guest, and attacked him with fire and weapons. And their King Gudrun fell, and most of his followers. Of those who were with his ships, some were killed, some slipped away and fled to great distances. And now were all the sons of Arik and Kinhal dead. 95. Building of the ship Longserpent. The winter after, King Olaf came from Halagoland, 81,000, he had a great vessel built at Hellehammer, which was larger than any ship in the country, and of which the beams are still to be seen. The length of keel that rested upon the grass was 74 ells. Thorberg Skathok was the man's name who was the master builder of the ship. But there were many others besides, some to fell wood, some to shape it, some to make nails, some to carry timber. And all that was used was of the best. The ship was both long and broad and high-sided, and strongly timbered. While they were planking the ship, it happened that Thorberg had to go home to his farm upon some urgent business. And as he remained there a long time, the ship was planked up on both sides when he came back. In the evening the king went out, and Thorberg with him, to see how the vessel looked, and everybody said that never was seen so large and so beautiful a ship of war. Then the king returned to the town. Early next morning the king returns again to the ship, and Thorberg with him. The carpenters were there before them, but all were standing idle with their arms across. The king asked, what was the matter? They said the ship was destroyed. For somebody had gone from stem to stern, and cut one deep notch after the other down the one side of the planking. When the king came nearer he saw it was so, and said, with an oath, the man shall die who hath thus destroyed the vessel out of envy, if he can be discovered, and I shall bestow a great reward on whoever finds him out. I can tell you, king, said Thorberg, who has done this piece of work. I don't think, replies the king, that anyone is so likely to find it out if thou art. Thorberg says, I will tell you, king, who did it? I did it myself. The king says, thou must restore it all to the same condition as before, or thy life shall pay for it. Then Thorberg went and chipped the planks until the deep notches were all smooth and made even with the rest. And the king and all present declared that the ship was much handsomer on the side of the hull which Thorberg had chipped, and bade him shape the other side in the same way, and gave him great thanks for the improvement. Afterwards Thorberg was the master builder of the ship until she was entirely finished. The ship was a dragon, built after the one the king had captured in Halagoland. But the ship was far larger, and more carefully put together in all her parts. The king called the ship Serpent the Long, and the other Serpent the Short. The Long Serpent had 34 benches for rowers. The head and the arched tail were both gilt, and the bulwarks were as high as in sea-going ships. The ship was the best and most costly ship ever made in Norway. 96. Earl Eirik, the son of Hakon. Earl Eirik, the son of Earl Hakon, and his brothers, with many other valiant men their relations, had left the country after Earl Hakon's fall. Earl Eirik went eastwards to Svitjod, to Olaf, the Swedish king, and he and his people were well received. King Olaf gave the Earl peace and freedom in the land, and great feasts, so that he could support himself and his men well. Thord Kilbingson speaks of this in the verses before given. Many people who fled from the country on account of King Olaf Tryggvason came out of Norway to Earl Eirik, and the Earl resolved to fit out ships and go a-cruising, in order to get property for himself and his people. First he steered to Gotland, and lay there long in summer watching for merchant vessels sailing towards the land, or for Vikings. Sometimes he landed and ravaged all round upon the sea coasts. So it is told in the Banda Drapa. Eirik, as we have lately heard, has waked the song of shield and sword, has waked the slumbering storm of shields, upon the Vikings' water fields, from Gotland's lonely shore has gone, far up the land, and battles won, and o'er the sea his name is spread, to friends a shield, to foes a dread. Afterwards Earl Alaric sailed south to Vinland, and at Stauren found some Viking ships, and gave them battle. Eirik gained the victory, and slew the Vikings. So it is told in the Banda Drapa. Earl Eirik, he who stoutly wields the battle axe in Storm of Shields, with his long ship surprised the foe at Stauren, and their strength laid low. Many a corpse floats round the shore. The strand with dead is studded o'er. The raven tears their sea-bleached skins. The land thrives well when Eirik wins. 97. Eirik's foray on the Baltic coasts. Earl Eirik sailed back to Sweden in autumn, and stayed there all winter, 89-97. But in the spring fitted out his war force again, and sailed up the Baltic. When he came to Valdemar's dominions he began to plunder and kill the inhabitants, and burn the dwellings everywhere as he came along, and to lay waste the country. He came to Eldigeberg, and besieged it until he took the castle. And he killed many people, broke down and burned the castle, and then carried destruction all around far and wide in Gardarike. So it is told in the Banda Drapa. The generous Earl, brave and bold, who scatters his bright shining gold, Eirik with fire-scattering hand, wasted the Russian monarch's land, with arrow shower, and storm of war, wasted the land of Valdemar. Eldega burns, and Eirik's might, scours through all Russia by flight. Earl Eirik was 5 years in all on this foray. And when he returned from Gardarike he ravaged all Adalcisla and Acisla, and took their 4 Viking ships from the Danes and killed every man on board. So it is told in the Banda Drapa. Among the isles flies round the word, that Eirik's blood-devouring sword has flashed like fire in the sound, and wasted all the land around. And Eirik too, the bold in fight, has broken down the robber might of 4 great Vikings, and has slain all of the crew, nor spared one Dane. In Gotland he has seized the town, in Cecils harried up and down. And all the people in dismay, fled to the forests far away. By land or sea, in field or way, what can withstand this Earl brave? All fly before his fiery hand, God save the Earl, and keep the land. When Eirik had been a year in Sweden he went over to Denmark, 89-96, to King Svein Tjugeskek, the Danish king, and courted his daughter Gyda. The proposal was accepted, and Earl Eirik married Gyda. And a year after, 89-97, they had a son, who was called Hakon. Earl Eirik was in the winter in Denmark, or sometimes in Sweden. But in summer he went a cruising. 98. King Svein's marriage. The Danish king, Svein Tjugeskek, was married to Gunhild, a daughter of Burisleif, king of the vines. But in the times we have just been speaking of it happened that Queen Gunhild fell sick and died. Soon after King Svein married Sigrid the Haughty, a daughter of Skonklartost, and mother of the Swedish King Olaf. And by means of this relationship there was great friendship between the kings and Earl Eirik, Hakon's son. 99. King Burisleif's marriage. Burisleif, the king of the vines, complained to his relation Earl Sigfold that the agreement was broken which Sigfold had made between King Svein and King Burisleif, by which Burisleif was to get in marriage Thyre, Harald's daughter, a sister of King Svein, but that marriage had not proceeded, for Thyre had given positive no to the proposal to marry her to an old and heathen king. Now, said King Burisleif to Earl Sigfold, I must have the promise fulfilled. And he told Earl Sigfold to go to Denmark, and bring him Thyre as his queen. Earl Sigfold loses no time, but goes to King Svein of Denmark, explains to him the case, and brings it so far by his persuasion, that the king delivered his sister Thyre into his hands, with her with some female attendants, and her foster father, by name Ozer Agasson, a man of great power, and some other people. In the agreement between the king and the earl, it was settled that Thyre should have in property the possessions which Queen Gunhild had enjoyed in Finland, besides other great properties as bride gifts. Thyre went sorely, and went very unwillingly. When the earl came to Finland, Burisleif held his wedding with Queen Thyre, and received her in marriage. But as long as she was among heathens she would neither eat nor drink with them, and this lasted for 7 days. 100. Olaf gets Thyre in marriage. It happened one night that Queen Thyre and Ozer ran away in the dark, and into the woods, and, to be short in our story, came at last to Denmark. but Hrothgar did not dare to remain, knowing that if her brother King Svein heard of her, he would send her back directly to Vinland. She went on, therefore, secretly to Norway, and never stayed her journey until she fell in with King Olaf, by whom she was kindly received. Thyre related to the king her sorrows, and entreated his advice in her need, and protection in his kingdom. Thyre was a well-spoken woman, and the king had pleasure in her conversation. He saw she was a handsome woman, and it came into his mind that she would be a good match. So he turns the conversation that way, and asks if she will marry him. Now, as she saw that her situation was such that she could not help herself, and considered what a luck it was for her to marry so celebrated a man, she bade him to dispose himself of her hand and faith. And, after near conversation, King Olaf took Thyre in marriage. This wedding was held in harvest after the king returned from Hallafellan, AD 999, and King Olaf and Queen Thyre remained all winter, AD 1000, at Nidaros. The following spring Queen Thyre complained often to King Olaf, and wept bitterly over it, that she who had so great property in Vinland had no goods or possessions here in the country that were suitable for a queen. And sometimes she would entreat the king with fine words to get her property restored to her, and saying that King Bjornflink was so great a friend of King Olaf that he would not deny King Olaf anything if they were to meet. But when King Olaf's friends heard of such speeches, they dissuaded him from any such expedition. It is related that the king one day early in spring was walking in the street, and met a man in the market with many, and, for that early season, remarkably large angelica roots. The king took a great stalk of the angelica in his hand, and went home to Queen Thyre's lodging. Thyre sat in her room weeping as the king came in. The king said, "Here, Queen, is a great angelica stalk, which I give thee." She threw it away, and said, "A greater present Harald Gormson gave to my mother." And he was not afraid to go out of the land and take his own. That was shown when he came here to Norway, and laid waste the greater part of the land, and seized on all the scat and revenues. And thou darest not go across the Danish dominions for this brother of mine, King Svein. As she spoke thus, King Olaf sprang up, and answered with loud oath, "Never did I fear thy brother King Svein. And if we meet he shall give way before me." 101. Olaf's levy for war. Soon after the king conducted a thing in the town, and proclaimed to all the public that in summer would go abroad upon an expedition out of the country, and would raise boats, ships, and men from every district. And at the same time fixed how many ships would have from the whole Trondheim fjord. Then he sent his message token south and north, both along the sea coast and up in the interior of the country, to let an army be gathered. The king ordered the Long Serpent to be put into the water, along with all his other ships both small and great. He himself steered the Long Serpent. When the crews were taken out for the ships, they were so carefully selected that no man on board the Long Serpent was older than 60 or younger than 20 years, and all were men distinguished for strength and courage. Those who were Olaf's bodyguard were in particular chosen men, both of the natives and the foreigners, and the boldest and strongest. 102. Crew on board of the Long Serpent. Elthered was the name of the man who bore King Olaf's banner, and was in the forecastle of the Long Serpent. And with him was Kuldrun the Marshal, Thorstein Ushafod, and Vicar of Bjørndalen, a brother of Ardagillen. By the bulkhead next the forecastle were that Romason from Godwither, Burst the Strong, and Skype from Gemtaland, Thrud the Strong from Villamork, and his brother of Thymer. Besides these were, of Hallafelland men, Hlunskjalg and Artmannsand, Haladverland from Suffolk, and Harit Hvasse. Together with these Trondheim men, Ketil the High, Thorfinn Idle, Havard and his brothers from Orketal. The following were in the four home: Bjorn from Stedla, Borg from the Fjords, Thorgrim Kjellofsen from Hvin, Asborn and Orm, Thord from Jardalag, Thorstein White from Prestadal, Arno from Moor, Halstein and Hope from the Fjord District, Eving Snack, Berthor Bistil, Halfel from Fjeller, Olaf Drang, Arnfinn from Sun, Sigurd Einar from Portland, and Finn, and Ketil from Rogaland and Richard Garth the Brisk. The following were in the hold next to Mast, Einar Tambashlíkar, who was not reckoned as fully experienced, being only 18 years old. Thorstein Leifvardsson, Thorolf, Iversmedda, and Orm Skorgarn. Many other valiant men were in the Serpent, although we cannot tell all their names. In every division of the hold were 8 men, and each and all chosen men. And in the fourth hold were 30 men. It was a common saying among people that the Long Serpent's crew is as distinguished for bravery, strength, and daring, among other men, as the Long Serpent was distinguished among other ships. Thorkel Ndfja, the king's brother, commanded the Short Serpent. And Thorkel Dodril and Jostein, the king's mother's brothers, had the Crane. And both these ships were well manned. King Olaf had 11 large ships from Trondheim, besides vessels with 20 rowers' benches, smaller vessels, and provision vessels. 103. Iceland baptized. When King Olaf had nearly rigged out his fleet in Nidaros, he appointed men over the Trondheim country in all districts and communities. He also sent to Iceland Gissur the White and Jolf Skeggjason to proclaim Christianity there, and sent with them a priest called Thormund, along with several men in holy orders. But he retained with him, as hostages, 4 Icelanders whom he thought the most important, namely, Kjartan Olafsson, Helder Gudmundsson, Kolbein Thordsson, and Spurtin Brunolfsson. Of Gissur and Jolf's progress, it is related that they came to Iceland before the Althing, and went to the Thing. And in that thing Christianity was introduced by law into Iceland, and in the course of the summer all the people were baptized, 81,000. 104. Greenland baptized. The same spring King Olaf also sent Leif Erikson, 81,000, to Greenland to proclaim Christianity there, and Leif went there that summer. In the ocean he took up the crew of a ship which had been lost, and who were clinging to the wreck. He also found Vinland the Good, arrived about harvest in Greenland, and had with him for it a priest and other teachers, with whom he went to Bredaheil to lodge with his father Eirik. People called him afterwards Leif the Lucky, but his father Eirik said that his luck and the luck balanced each other. For if Leif had saved a wreck in the ocean, he had brought a hurtful person with him to Greenland, and that was the priest. 105. Ragnvald sends messengers to Olaf. The winter after King Olaf had baptized Halagalin, he and Queen Thyre were in Nidaros. And the summer before Queen Thyre had brought King Olaf a boy child, which was both stout and promising, and was called Harald, after its mother's father. The king and queen loved the infant exceedingly, and rejoiced in the hope that it would grow up and inherit after its father. But it lived barely a year after its birth, which both took much to heart. In that winter were many Icelanders and other clever men in King Olaf's house, as before related. His sister Ingibjorg, Tryggvi's daughter, King Olaf's sister, was also at the court at that time. She was beautiful in appearance, modest and frank with the people, had a steady manly judgment, and was beloved of all. She was very fond of the Icelanders who were there, but most of Kjartan Olafsson, for he had been longer than the others in the king's house. And he found it always amusing to converse with her, for she had both understanding and cleverness in talk. The king was always gay and full of mirth in his intercourse with people, and often asked about the manners of the great men and chiefs in the neighboring countries, when strangers from Denmark or Sweden came to see him. The summer before Halford Vandredesvold had come from Gotland, where he had been with Earl Ragnvald, Ulf's son, who had lately come to the government of West Gotland. Ulf, Ragnvald's father, was a brother of Sigurd the Haughty, so that King Olaf the Swede and Earl Ragnvald were brothers and sisters' children. Halford told Olaf many things about the Earl. He said he was an able chief, excellently fitted for governing, generous with money, brave and steady in friendship. Halford said also the Earl desired much the friendship of King Olaf, and had spoken of making court Ingibjorg, Tryggvi's daughter. This same winter came ambassadors from Gotland, and fell in with King Olaf in the north, in Nidaros, and brought the message which Halford had spoken of, that the Earl desired to be King Olaf's entire friend, and wished to become his brother-in-law by obtaining his sister Ingibjorg in marriage. There were the ambassadors laid before the king sufficient tokens in proof that in reality they came from the Earl on this errand. The king listened with approbation to their speech. but said that Ingeborg must determine on his assent to the marriage. The king then talked to his sister about the matter, and asked her opinion about it. She answered to this effect, "I have been with you for some time, and you have shown brotherly care and tender respect for me ever since you came to the country. I will agree therefore to your proposal about my marriage, provided that you do not marry me to a heathen man." The king said it should be as she wished. The king then spoke to the ambassadors, and it was settled before they departed that in summer Earl Ragnvald should meet the king in the east parts of the country, to enter into the fullest friendship with each other, and when they met they would settle about the marriage. With this reply the earl's messengers went westward, and King Olaf remained all winter in Nidaros in great splendor, and with many people about him. 106. Olaf sends expedition to Vinland. King Olaf proceeded in summer with his ships and men southwards along the land, and past Dan. With him were Queen Thyre and Ingeborg, Tryggvai's daughter, the king's sister. Many of his friends also joined him, and other persons of consequence who had prepared themselves to travel with the king. The first man among these was his brother-in-law, Erling Skjalgsson, who had with him a large ship of 30 benches of rowers, and which was in every respect well equipped. His brothers-in-law Hurning and Thorgeir also joined him, each of whom for himself steered a large vessel. And many other powerful men besides followed him. With all this war force he sailed southwards along the land. But when he came south as far as Rogaland he stopped there, for Erling Skjalgsson had prepared for him a splendid feast at Sol. The Earl Ragnvald, Ulf's son, from Gotland, came to meet the king, and to settle the business which had been proposed in winter in the messages between them, namely, the marriage with Ingeborg the king's sister. Olaf received him kindly, and when the matter came to be spoken of, the king said he would keep his word, and marry his sister Ingeborg to him, provided he would accept the true faith, and make all the subjects he ruled over in his land be baptized. The earl agreed to this, and he and all his followers were baptized. Now was the feast and large that Erling had prepared, for the earl held his wedding there with Ingeborg the king's sister. King Olaf had now married off all his sisters. The earl, with Ingeborg, set out on his way home. And the king sent learned men with him to baptize the people in Gotland, and to teach them the right faith and morals. The king and the earl parted in the greatest friendship. 107. Olaf's expedition Vinland. After his sister Ingeborg's wedding, the king made ready in all haste to leave the country with his army, which was both great and made up of fine men. When he left the land and sailed southwards he had 60 ships of war, with which he sailed past Denmark, and in through the Sound, and on to Vinland. He appointed a meeting with King Björnleif. And when the kings met, they spoke about the property which King Olaf demanded, and the conference went off peaceably, as a good account was given of the properties which King Olaf thought himself entitled to there. He passed here much of his summer, and found many of his old friends. 108. Conspiracy against King Olaf. The Danish king, Svein Tjugeskeg, was married, as before related, to Sigrid the Haughty. Sigrid was King Olaf Tryggvason's greatest enemy. The cause of which, as before said, was that King Olaf had broken off with her, and had struck her in the face. She urged King Svein much to give battle to King Olaf Tryggvason, saying that he had reason enough, as Olaf had married his sister Thyre without his leave, and that your predecessors would not have submitted to. Such persuasions Sigrid had often in her mouth. And at last she brought it so far that Svein resolved firmly on doing so. Early in spring King Svein sent messengers eastward into Svitjod, to his son-in-law Olaf, the Swedish king, and to Earl Eric, and informed them that King Olaf of Norway was levying men for an expedition, and intended in summer to go to Vinland. To this news the Danish king added an invitation to the Swedish king and Earl Eric to meet King Svein with an army, so that all together they might make an attack on King Olaf Tryggvason. The Swedish king and Earl Eric were ready enough for this, and immediately assembled a great fleet and an army through all Svitjod, with which they sailed southwards to Denmark, and arrived there after King Olaf Tryggvason had sailed to the eastward. Helder the unchristian tells of this in his lay on Earl Eric. The king said Duer raised a host of warriors on the Swedish coast. The brave went southwards to the fight, who loved the sword storm's gleaming light. The brave, who sailed the wild wolf's mouth, followed bold Eirik to the south. The brave, who sword and blood, each one, with the bold Earl to sea is gone. The Swedish king and Earl Eirik sailed to meet the Danish king, and they had all went together in immense force. 109. Earl Sigfold's treacherous plans. At the same time that King Svein sent a message to Svitjod for an army, he sent Earl Sigfold to Vinland to spy out King Olaf Tryggvason's proceedings, and to bring it about by cunning devices that King Svein and King Olaf should fall in with each other. So Sigfold sets out to go to Vinland. First, he came to Jomsborg, and then he sought out King Olaf Tryggvason. There was much friendship in their conversation, and the Earl got himself into great favor with the king. Astrid, the Earl's wife, King Bjornleif's daughter, was a great friend of King Olaf Tryggvason, particularly on account of the connection which had been between them when Olaf was married to her sister Gyra. Earl Sigfold was a prudent, ready-minded man. And as he had got a voice in King Olaf's council, he put him off much from sailing homewards, finding various reasons for delay. Olaf's people were in the highest degree dissatisfied with this. For the men were anxious to get home, and they lay ready to sail, waiting only for a wind. At last Earl Sigfold got a secret message from Denmark that the Swedish king's army was arrived from the east, and that Earl Eirik also was ready. And that all these chiefs had resolved to sail eastwards to Vinland, and wait for King Olaf at an island which is called Svol. They also desired the Earl to contrive matters so that they should meet King Olaf there. 110. King Olaf's voyage from Vinland. There came first a flying report to Vinland that the Danish king, Svein, had fitted out an army. And it was soon whispered that he intended to attack King Olaf. But Earl Sigfold says to King Olaf, it never can be King Svein's intention to venture with the Danish force alone, to give battle to thee with such a powerful army. But if thou hast any suspicion that evil is on foot, I will follow thee with my force. At that time it was considered a great matter to have Jomsborg Vikings with an army, and I will give thee 11 well-manned ships. The king accepted this offer. And as the light breeze of wind that came was favorable, he ordered the ships to get underway, and the war horns to sound the departure. The sails were hoisted and all the small vessels, sailing fastest, got out to sea before the others. The Earl, who sailed nearest to the king's ship, called to those on board to tell the king to sail in this keel track, for I know where the water is deepest between the islands and in the sands, and these large ships require the deepest. Then the Earl sailed first with his 11 ships, and the king followed with his large ships, also 11 in number. But the whole of the rest of the fleet sailed out to sea. Now when Earl Sigfold came sailing close under the island of Skuld, a skip rowed out to inform the Earl that the Danish king's army was lying in the harbor before them. Then the Earl ordered the sails of his vessels to be struck, and they rowed in under the island. Helder the unchristian says, from out the south bold Tryggvi's son, with 170 ships came on, to die his sword and bloody fight, against the Danish foeman's might. But the false Earl the king betrayed. And treacherous Sigfold, it is said, deserted from King Olaf's fleet, and they fled, the Danes to meet. It is said here that King Olaf and Earl Sigfold had 70 sail of vessels, and one more, when they sailed from the south. 111. Consultation of the kings. The Danish king Svein, the Swedish king Olaf, and Earl Eirik were there with all their forces, 1,000. The weather being fine and clear sunshine, all these chiefs, with a great suite, went out on the isle to see the vessels sailing out at sea, and many of them crowded together. And they saw among them one large and glancing ship. The two kings said, that is a large and very beautiful vessel, that will be the Long Serpent. Earl Eirik replied, that is not the Long Serpent. And he was right. For it was the ship belonging to Andrade of Gimser. Soon after they saw another vessel coming sailing along much larger than the first. Then says King Svein, Olaf Tryggvason must be afraid, for he does not venture to sail with the figurehead of the dragon upon his ship. Says Earl Eirik, that is not the king's ship yet. For I know that ship by the colored stripes of cloth in her sail. That is Erling Skjalgson's. Let him sail. fort is the better for us that the ship is away from Olaf's fleet, so well equipped as she is. Soon after they saw innumerable Sigfold's ships, which turned and inlaid themselves under the island. Then they saw 3 ships coming along under sail, and one of them very large. King Svein ordered his men to go to their ships, for there comes the Long Serpent. Earl Eirik says, many other great and stately vessels have thee besides the Long Serpent. Let us wait a little. Then said many, Earl Eirik will not fight and avenge his father. And it is a great shame that it should be told that we lay here with so great a force, and allow King Olaf to sail out to sea before our eyes. But when they had spoken thus for a short time, they saw 4 ships coming sailing along, of which one had a large dragon head richly gilt. Then King Svein stood up and said, that dragon shall carry me this evening high, for I shall steer it. Then said many, the Long Serpent is indeed a wonderfully large and beautiful vessel, and it shows a great mind to have built such a ship. Earl Eirik said so loud that several persons heard him, if King Olaf had no ether vessels but only that one, King Svein would never take it from him with the Danish force alone. Thereafter all the people rushed on board their ships, took down the tents, and in all haste made ready for battle. While the chiefs were speaking among themselves as above related, they saw 3 very large ships coming sailing along, and at last after them a 4th, and that was the Long Serpent. Of the large ships which had gone before, and which they had taken for the Long Serpent, the first was the Crane. The one after that was the Short Serpent. And when they really saw the Long Serpent, all knew, and nobody had a word to say against it, that it must be Olaf Tryggvason who was sailing in such a vessel. And they went to their ships to arm for the fight. An agreement had been concluded among the chiefs, King Svein, King Olaf the Swede, and Earl Eirik, that they should divide Norway among them in 3 parts, in case they succeeded against Olaf Tryggvason. But that he of the chiefs who should first board the Serpent should have her, and all the booty found in her, and each should have the ships he cleared for himself. Earl Eirik had a large ship of war which he used upon his Viking expeditions. And there was an iron-beared or cone above on both sides of the stem, and below it a thick iron plate as broad as the combs, which went down quite to the gunwale. 112. Of King Olaf's people. When Earl Sigfold with his vessels rode in under the island, Thorkel Dodrel of the Crane, and the other ship commanders who sailed with him, saw that he turned his ships toward the isle, and thereupon let fall the sails, and rowed after him, calling out, and asking why he sailed that way. The Earl answered, that he was waiting for King Olaf, as he feared there were enemies in the water. They lay upon their oars until Thorkel Nethia came up with the Short Serpent and the 3 ships which followed him. When they told them the same, they too struck sail, and let the ships drive, waiting for King Olaf. But when the king sailed in towards the isle, the whole enemy's fleet came rowing within the mouth of the sound. When they saw this, they begged the king to hold on his way, and not risk battle with so great a force. The king replied, high on the quarterdeck where he stood, strike the sails. Never shall men of mine think of flight. I never fled from battle. Let God dispose of my life, but flight I shall never take. It was done as the king commanded. Hafred tells of it thus. And far and wide the saying bold, of the brave warriors shall be told. The king, in many a fray well tried, to his brave champions round him cried, my men shall never learn from me, from the dark weapon cloud to flee. Nor were the brave words spoken then, forgotten by his faithful men. 113. Olaf's ships prepared for battle. King Olaf ordered the war horns to sound for all his ships to close up to each other. The king's ship lay in the middle of the line, and on one side lay the little serpent, and on the other the crane. And as they made fast the stems together, one, the long serpent's stem and the short serpents were made fast together. But when the king saw it, he called out to his men, and ordered them to lay the larger ship more in advance, so that its stern should not lie so far behind in the fleet. Then says Alf the Red, if the long serpent is to lie as much more ahead of the other ships as she is longer than them, we shall have hard work of it here on the forecastle. The king replies, I did not think I had a forecastle man afraid as well as Red. Says Alf, defend thou the quarterdeck as I shall the forecastle. The king had a bow in his hands, and laid an arrow on the string, and aimed at Alf. Alf said, shoot another way, king, where it is more needful, my work is I gain. Endnotes. 1. The mode of fighting in sea battles appears, from this and many other descriptions, to have been for each party to bind together the stems and sterns of their own ships, forming them thus into a compact body as soon as the fleets came within fighting distance or within spear's throw. They appear to have fought principally from the focus off, and to have used grappling irons for dragging a vessel out of the line or within boarding distance. L. 114. Of King Olaf. King Olaf stood on the Serpent's quarterdeck, high over the others. He had a gilt shield and a helmet inlaid with gold. Over his armor he had a short red cloak, and was easy to be distinguished from other men. When King Olaf saw that the scattered forces of the enemy gathered themselves together under the banners of their ships, he asked, "Who is the chief of the force right opposite to us?" He was answered that it was King Svein with the Danish army. The king replied, "We are not afraid of these self-Danes, for there is no bravery in them. But who are the troops on the right of the Danes?" He was answered that it was King Olaf with the Swedish forces. "Better it were," says King Olaf, "for these Swedes to be sitting at home killing their sacrifices, than to be venturing under our weapons from the long Serpent. But who owns the large ships on the larboard side of the Danes?" "That is Earl Arvid Hagensson," say they. The king replies, "He, methinks, has good reason for meeting us, and we may expect the sharp